In recent years, there has been an immense amount of debate on the merits of certain film criticisms. One of the most popular criticisms which has recently been condemned is discussion on plot holes. Arguably one of the most popular cases of this was Patrick Willems' video Shut Up About Plot Holes. The video didn't necessarily receive an overwhelming amount of views or positive reception, but it stirred the pot in the video essay and film criticism community nonetheless. I've chosen to largely ignore criticisms about plot holes, but recently I watched Brown Table's video on The Dark Knight Rises where he concluded his video with a rather contradictory and nonsensical statement. This video isn't meant to be a response to Patrick Willems or Brown Table. However, I will be using their videos as examples of criticisms toward plot holes. Here is a brief statement made in the conclusion of Brown Table's video.
The film, like a lot of films, is layered with impossibilities like how did Bruce heal his back so quickly, how did he get back to Gotham? Plot holes like that exist, but having no relevance to the plot in any way, they shouldn't really be considered plot holes, but more so nitpicking.
This single asinine line is the only part of Brown Table's video where he addresses the criticisms towards the film, which is strange considering that the title of his video states that the film is better than you remember. For most of his video, Brown Table addresses themes and character ideologies. He made several great points about the ideologies of Bane and Batman and how both of them are willing to die and or fight for what they believe in. But while Brown Table is thorough in discussing theme and characters, he seems rather dismissive of the plot criticisms toward the film. Taking a look at the tone of voice and general wording of Brown Table's statement, it seems that he chose not to address the plot holes in the film since he knew that it would be nearly impossible to disprove them. Instead, he emphasized discussion on theme and chose to handwave the plot errors. But his statement is a great summary on the general attitude many YouTubers and audiences have toward plot holes. Broken down in layman's terms, his statement is this: other films have plot holes and plot holes exist, but plot holes don't matter and they're just nitpicks. I'm going to use this statement as the basis of my argument and prove why this is a blatant falsehood. I think the reason that many people become frustrated with plot holes in movies and tend to handwave them is the fact that if all the information present in the film proves the existence of the plot hole, then there is no way to argue against it. Patrick uses one section of his video to separate a plot hole from a plot contrivance. This is something you can do to argue against a criticism of a plot hole in a film. However, if the information in the film proves the existence of the plot hole, then this cannot be done. But this does not mean that the discussion about the plot or a particular scene needs to end. What you do instead is make an assessment about the plot hole's merits and its relevance to the film as a whole. For example, one of the classic cases of a plot hole in a great film is Jurassic Park's paddock scene. In this scene, the T-Rex manages to walk through the fence since the power in the park has gone down. After the T-Rex begins dismantling Tim and Lex's Jeep, it pushes the car over the fence, revealing that there is in fact a 50-foot trench between the fence and the T-Rex area. It's a geographical continuity error which is in the scene to create two forms of suspense: the Jeep being attacked and the Jeep being dropped off the cliff. Rather than use two separate locations, the filmmakers use the same location, and thus the scene has a glaring plot hole. With all of the information we have, this plot hole is indisputable. However, knowing that the plot hole exists means you can have an interesting discussion about how much this plot hole affects the film. It certainly affects the paddock scene, considering that previously in the scene we were left to assume that our characters could escape from the danger by leaping the fence. But the geography of the scene spontaneously changes, thus altering the stakes of the scene. This is something which can ruin immersion and affect the audience's investment in the scene. In spite of this, all other scenes featuring the T-Rex and the location of the paddock are not harmed by this inconsistency. In the previous scenes with the paddock, the assumption was that there was no trench. If there is one, it still has no impact on the scene since no one ever goes to the fence. And every other scene featuring the T-Rex does not feature the paddock. Aside from this plot hole, Jurassic Park is a very well-written film operating within its own science and internal logic. The filmmakers took special care to explore the science and mechanics of the story through cleverly implemented exposition and character discussions. Because of this, the film operates without many moments which can affect the immersion of the audience. On the other hand, a film like Star Wars: The Last Jedi features plot holes in the script which directly play a role in the progression of the characters or lead to the film's most crucial payoffs. Both Patrick and Brown Table mention a rather glaring plot hole in The Dark Knight Rises. Early in the film, Bruce Wayne is defeated by Bane and left in a prison in a third world country which requires him to climb out and make a large leap in order to escape. Bruce inexplicably manages to recover from a compound spinal fracture.
There's a vertebra protruding from your back. It has to be put back.
Escapes the pit, and walks out into a nearby town. The next time we see Bruce, however, he has somehow managed to return to Gotham City. Once again, an assessment can be made about this plot hole in regards to its relevance to the story. Bruce was stranded in a foreign country without any money, passport, or known contacts or resources. In spite of this, he managed to leave the country without drawing any attention to himself from the public. He managed to get resources to fight against Bane, and managed to enter the city despite the fact that the city was in lockdown and patrolled by military and police as well as Bane's mercenaries. The reason that this is a plot hole is that with the information the audience has, Bruce did not have the ability to return to Gotham. Now, is it possible that he could and that everything has a reasonable explanation? Absolutely. He could have contacted someone who owed him a favor, who could have given him transport out of the country, and he could have strategically managed to enter the city through an elaborate method to evade the military and mercenaries. However, none of this is in the film. There isn't enough in this scene to serve as a connective to this scene. So how significant of a plot hole is this? Well, it acts as a connective to a major payoff in the film, and it serves as the reason that Batman manages to return to defeat Bane. These are rather significant plot points to be based around a plot hole. Therefore, this is an example of a plot hole which has a significant bearing on the film. Patrick's explanation for this is using a rather embarrassing false equivalency. He claims that the concept of montage explains this since the audience can fill in the gaps in the storytelling.
In The Dark Knight Rises, we never see how Batman gets back to Gotham City. That's a plot hole.
One of the earliest cinematic developments was the concept of montage. The idea is that when two images are presented in sequence, the audience understands that they occur chronologically and will mentally fill in the time between scenes. So for instance, if a person is in one location and the next scene they're in another location, we understand that in between scenes they traveled between the locations. Movies tend to assume that the audience is reasonably intelligent, but I guess they're wrong. If movies showed us every single second that happened during the span of the story, they would be 40 hours long and really f***ing boring.
What he overlooks is the fact that in order for a montage to be seamless, the audience needs to have enough information to fill in the gaps. For instance, if there is a scene in a movie where a character is in front of a motorcycle putting on a helmet, then in the next shot a person is riding a motorcycle on a road, and the next shot is an establishing shot of a police station with the motorcycle out front, it's safe to assume that character went from place to place by riding the motorcycle. The flaw with Patrick's point is that he claims that if you show everything that happens in a film rather than montage, then movies would be several hours long and consequentially boring. This is a blatant straw man. Not every single detail needs to be in a montage for it to make sense to the audience. In the example I just used from the girl with the dragon tattoo, for instance, this scene sets up all necessary framing devices for the audience to understand the scene. You see Lizbeth in front of her motorcycle, a shot of her driving, and her bike parked in front of a new location. The audience doesn't need to see her entire drive to understand that she drove to the police station. The editing in the montage helps the audience follow along the story. However, if there was a film where a character was driven out into the middle of a desert and shot in the head by the villain, yet in the next scene somehow managed to return to the villain's hideout, overpower his henchmen, and confront him in a fight, this would be a plot hole. With the information the audience has, the hero should have been killed instantly by being shot in the head. Is it possible that the character survived? Yes, they could have been found by someone in the desert and given surgery for their head injury.
Dying. You're not dying, you just can't think of anything good to do.
But if the film doesn't explain this, then the connection between the two scenes is a plot hole. You don't need to show every detail of a story for it to be coherent. But if a character is in a situation which requires the audience to learn new information in order to fill in the story gaps, then you need to explain the information through editing or exposition. Brown Table simply goes with Haishi's long-running joke.
Let's all just use the argument that everyone always uses whenever something like this happens. How did Batman do it? Because he's the goddamn Batman.
I already explained why Batman being capable of returning isn't why the scene connection is a plot hole. What I instead want to tackle is the last part of his statement.
Plot holes like that exist, but having no relevance to the plot in any way, they shouldn't really be considered plot holes, but more so nitpicking.
One of the most common terms used to counter criticisms such as plot holes is the term nitpicking. Quantifying this term is why assessing a plot hole is important. The definition of nitpicking according to Merriam-Webster is minute and usually unjustified criticism. What I typically say a nitpick is in regards to film criticism is a valid criticism which has little to no bearing on a film. A classic example of a nitpick in a film is the car in Fellowship of the Ring. In this shot, you can clearly see a car through this dust cloud. This is a flaw in the film. It falls into the realm of editing and continuity with the world building of the film. Obviously, the editor overlooked this in the editing process and accidentally left it in the final cut. As far as continuity is concerned, cars do not exist in the Shire. Therefore, this is something which goes against the world building of the film. However, this car is in the background of a single shot in the film. The car plays no role in the plot of the film, and aside from the world building, it doesn't affect the shot with Sam and Frodo. Another example is the air cannon on the chariot in Gladiator.
Oops.
This is an example of an anachronism which was created because of an editing mistake. Since this was left in, the anachronism serves as a world-building error. You can find these kinds of mistakes in plenty of popular movies. These flaws are examples of nitpicks. Valid criticisms with the film which don't play any significant role in either the characters or plot. Brown Table included the plot holes of Bruce's spinal injury and escape from the prison as examples of nitpicking. This is not the case. If you consider these flaws to be nitpicks, then the bar for nitpicking is so low that nearly every flaw in a film could be considered a nitpick. Different flaws have different levels of significance, but glaring plot holes found in films like The Dark Knight Rises and The Last Jedi do not fall into the realm of nitpicks. They are filled with significant plot holes which immensely influence the film. If you are frustrated with discussions about plot holes, I encourage you to consider every confirmed plot hole to be valid. But rather than hand-wave them or label them as nitpicks, take a good look at them and form an assessment. If a plot hole has little or no bearing on significant events in the story or character moments, then it is not significant. But if plot holes are used as the basis of story moments and character arcs, then they are significant flaws. Plot holes are not the end-all be-all of film criticism. Simply accept them if they are valid, disprove them if they are invalid, and call them nitpicks if they are blue jeans in one shot in Gladiator.
I know it seems impossible to watch movies wrong, but you're watching movies wrong.
No, 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 no.